Hi there, I'm Rex King. Welcome back to another episode of From the Archive. And like I said last week, it's time for the holiday season, and it's time to look at some holiday movies. Yeah, as I said last year when I was doing this show, I don't really care for holiday movies all that much. I do like a few, but the grand majority of them I find to be meh. And I'm going to start explaining that this year by looking at a couple meh specials, starting with Noel. So Noel was directed by Chaz Palminteri. I apologize if I mispronounced that name, and written by David Hubbard. It was released back in 2004. I couldn't find box office numbers, so I don't know how successful it was. Most holiday movies are very successful in theaters, so I'm going to go on a limb here and say it was probably a success. Critics, on the other hand, eviscerated it. They felt it was pretty meh. It didn't have enough going for it, and the amount of stories in the film really conflicted with the overall feel. What do I mean by that? Well, Noel has three different stories. One with an older woman played by Susan Sarandon, who is alone on Christmas and is basically spending Christmas with her mother, who has Alzheimer's in the hospital and has lost all sense of her faculties and may not even notice that she's there. And this is basically that story's about Susan Sarandon's character feeling alone and isolated on Christmas. The next story is about this cop played by Paul Walker, who's about to marry this beautiful woman played by Penelope Cruz. Only problem is Paul Walker's character is a jealous psychopath. I'm not kidding. That's what the movie describes him as. This causes Penelope Cruz's character to kind of drift away from him during this Christmas Eve night. And he also runs into Alan Arkin's character, who believes that Paul Walker's character is the reincarnation of his dead wife. Yeah, that one's a little weird. And then we have this other one about this guy played by Marcus Thomas who wants to spend Christmas in a hospital because the best memory he's ever had as a kid was a Christmas in the hospital. And that's his story because we don't get nearly enough about that. So let's break down each story, shall we? So the first story with the elderly woman feeling isolated on Christmas, it echoes a lot of feelings that people have about Christmas who don't have a family dynamic to really hold them over for the holidays. Her only family that she has access to is her mother, and her mother doesn't have full hold of her faculties. So when she runs to take solace in this other guy's room, who's also alone for the holidays, but is kind of in a coma from what we can tell, it really heightens the feeling of isolation that she feels. It's not until towards the end of the film when she meets this guy played by Robin Williams, who kind of helps her get through the night, that she really starts to realize that maybe it's time for her to really move on from just solely taking care of her mother and taking care of everyone else and start to take care of herself. And that's really the crux of the entire movie, is the idea of moving on. For example, the second story about with Paul Walker's character and Alan Arkin's character. Alan Arkin's character is still searching for forgiveness for what happened to his wife. His wife died in a car accident because of a jealous fit that he was throwing. And it mirrors what's going through Paul Walker's character's life at the moment, with him being a jealous psychopath, again, as the film describes him, and him kind of starting to push his fiance away, and she not really knowing what to do, not really knowing if they want to really make a family and make this a permanent part of their lives. And both those stories are kind of interesting. I think that the Paul Walker's and Alan Arkin's dynamic is pretty interesting as well. I think that it's a little weird and it doesn't really fit with the grounded reality that this film was trying to go for, I think. But to be honest, the weakest of the stories is the Marcus Thomas story, where this guy wants to break his own arm to get inside the hospital because it's the best time he's ever felt. but we really don't get much beyond that. We get some backstory about why he feels this way, but we don't really get a resolution. He gets in the hospital, he leaves the hospital. We don't really know what the end result is with him, and as such, you could have deleted his entire story from the film and would have lost absolutely nothing. It is another story that harkens back to the whole moving on, because he's pining for a time period in his life where he was happy and he's really miserable right now, but yeah, it doesn't add anything to the film. At the end of the day, this movie's stories are all just trying to relate to people who feel alone during the holidays, and it doesn't do it all that well, and it honestly, even with the happy endings that the film is going for, it still feels bittersweet and doesn't really seem to understand what makes the holidays so lonely for many, many people. The characters are all written fine. They all get their chance to shine, and they all have their own little interesting moments. And I really enjoy the way the characters are written. It's just that there's too many of them. Again, the crux of having 3 stories in your film, that I feel like that if you just had cut back or honestly focused on maybe 1 or 2 stories, the characters would have shined a lot better. The performances, everyone in here is a top-notch performer, and no shock, they all do a fantastic job. It's just a shame that they don't all get great moments to fully shine. The visuals are fine. There wasn't a moment that was really badly shot. There was a few moments where I was like, wow, that's a weird green screen effect. For instance, when Rose is, who's Susan Sarandon's character, is on the pier and looking out over the water, you can clearly see it's a green screen, and it's kind of distracting. I'm not sure why they couldn't just find a pier to shoot at, but whatever. And there are a couple other moments where it's just clearly stock footage. So yeah, the visuals are here and there. The music score done by Alan Menken, of all people, is really good and doesn't belong in this movie in the slightest. I'm really curious why the heck Alan Menken was brought on for this film. I mean, he's a legendary composer. At the end of the day, Noel is lackluster. It's got a bunch of sweet, tender moments that don't really go anywhere. It's trying to really relate to people, but doing it in such a weird manner that disconnects with its audience. It really just doesn't know what it really wants to try to do, and because there is 3 stories here, the film just feels crowded. You really should have cut this down to 1, maybe 2 stories. But they couldn't do that because, let's face it, none of these stories alone, or just with 2 of them, would have probably made for a full runtime. Oh boy. So like I said, I was doing this to kind of explain my problem with most holiday specials. Yeah, most of them, like this movie, are sweet and tender and don't have anywhere to go other than just that. Anyway, is Noel a buy, stream, or avoid altogether? Honestly, if you've seen any Hallmark movie, it's better than this. So yeah, this is an avoid altogether. There's no special features, so this is definitely not a buy. And even if I could find it on streaming, I didn't even look, because I would skip this movie outright. This movie is absolutely a miserable time. There are a few times where I watched this with somebody else and they did end up crying during it. So it does manipulate some people emotionally, but it's so hollow when you start to really think about it. This movie is a complete and utter waste of time. Well, that's one really bad holiday special out of the way. Next week, we don't get any better. Love the Coopers is next. See you then.